A vampire is a sinister thing. They look like us, act like us, yet beneath that veneer of mortality lies an insatiable thirst. They look down on us, call us cattle. They see themselves as superior because they prey upon us. But for all their might and power, they are but slaves to their own thirst. It drives them. It lords over them. It sends them into a frenzy when it cannot be quenched. They are eternally bound by this unnatural addiction, yet it is we, delicate, finite mortals, who bear the brunt of their sanguine shackles. Within the country of Dratho lies a region called the Gordron Valley. The city of Abingate sits by the river that lazily snakes its way through the valley. While seemingly peaceful and scenic, a dark presence lingers within the region, clinging to the shadows and feasting during the night. By day, this region is indistinguishable from any other civilized land. Farmers work their fields, merchants sell their wares, wealthy nobles walk the streets with fine clothes and an air of superiority. But by night, the true darkness will sometimes emerge from the shadows, bearing claws and fangs. Feral vampires lurk within the forest surrounding Abingate, venturing out after the sun sets and hunting down anyone unfortunate enough to be outside during their bloodlust. These particular vampires have been subjected to a specific strain of vampirism that has turned them into frenzied beasts. A small fragment of their previous mortal selves still lingers somewhere within, but now they are driven nearly to madness from their thirst for blood. They're almost like ghouls or zombies in that regard, attacking anything purely on instinct so they can feed upon it. However, they are not the only vampires in the Gordron Valley. Tucked away in the forested hills, Castle Orm overlooks Abingate from its elevated perch, looming and peering down on the city like a silent, distant observer. Castle Orm is home to the Dorvani clan, a small clan of vampires, though the majority of the people in the Gordron Valley are unaware of their vampiric existence. Compared to the feral vampires who stalk the forests and hunt from the shadows, the Dorvani are much more civilized and dignified, at least as much as vampires can be. They masquerade as a small, reclusive family of nobility, sending their servants out for supplies and rarely interacting with the outside world. The regular mortal citizens of this region are somewhat suspicious of them, making up stories about their reclusiveness, or spreading rumors, how the area around the castle is dark and cursed, or that the family is sickly and frail, rendering them unable to leave the castle. Whether or not anyone actually gives credence to the stories varies from person to person, but the outcome is always the same. It keeps prying eyes and curious onlookers away from the castle. Most of the time. So, how did this region become so infested with vampires? To answer that, we'll need to go back in time. But first, let me start by explaining how vampirism works in this setting. Not all vampires are the same. Like many diseases and viruses, vampirism has several different strains, or variations. They aren't well studied yet within the setting, so most of them don't really have official names or classifications. So I'll just be referring to the two variations in this video as regular and feral. The regular vampirism is much like the traditional vampire in D&D, or even other forms of media. They were mortals who were cursed with vampirism, turning their skin pale from being effectively undead, giving them enhanced speed and power, growing fangs and sometimes claws, halting their aging and allowing them to quickly regenerate any wounds, and, most notably, thirst for blood. However, while they may be immortal, that doesn't mean that they're unkillable. Vampire weaknesses include sunlight, which will kill them from a few minutes of exposure, wounds from weapons coated in holy water, or even the vampire being subjected to large quantities of holy water, a stake through the heart, beheading, or their bodies being otherwise completely destroyed. I'll cover the feral strain a little bit later. According to vampire legend, all of the strains originated from Vargolis, an entity that is effectively the god of vampires, or at the very least, their progenitor. Because vampirism now spreads like a plague or a disease, most vampires are unaware of Vargalis and the origins of the different strains. But he is very real indeed, and he demands his blood tithe. Those that know of the ancient vampire lore know that Vargalis initially cursed mortals with his gift of the night, granting them enhanced powers at a hefty cost. A vampire's thirst for blood works on two fronts, one being biological, and the other being somewhat metaphysical, almost religious in a way. Because vampires are suspended between life and death, they must leech upon the blood and life force of other living things to sustain themselves. If they don't, their bodies begin to betray them, like an addict suffering from withdrawals. Their faces become more sunken and hollow, and they begin to look sickly. Their attitudes change as they become more hostile, even violent, degrading into feral beasts that act purely on the instinct and desire for blood, should they go too long without feeding. The other reason for their thirst is that, by consuming the blood and life force of a living creature, a portion of that is automatically transferred to Vargalis. This is the price that vampires must pay for their power. When they turn feral from their inability or refusal to feed, the instinctual beast that emerges from them is a kind of failsafe that Vargalis has installed within the curse. If a vampire feeds regularly, then all is well. If they are unable to meet the tithe, their own bodies seek it out for them. And if they are still unable to meet that tithe, then they will have outlived their usefulness to Vargalis and will be consumed by their bloodlust. Within vampire society, there is a kind of hierarchy or tier system. At the top are the true vampires. Vampirism spreads through bites like a disease, but only true vampires are able to spread the curse. The individual on the receiving end must also drink the true vampire's blood. Otherwise, if they've only been bitten by the vampire, they will become a vampire spawn instead. Spawn bear many similarities to true vampires, but they're weaker, subservient, and unable to spread their vampirism to others. A spawn can also later become a true vampire if their master allows them to drink their blood. When a true vampire feeds, they have the choice of two different bites, one for feeding and one for spreading their vampirism. I think they would have a specialized gland in their mouths that can produce an infectious saliva to spread their vampirism, should they choose to activate that gland when they bite someone. This brings me to the second strain of vampirism, the ferals. For the most part, this variation is almost identical to the regular strain, but where it differs is that the vampires afflicted by this version have much more noticeable behavioral changes. The feral strain vampires have a more demanding thirst for blood and are much more aggressive, even when properly sated. They become frenzied from being blood-starved much faster than the regular strain, and the feral spawn could almost be considered wild animals with how frenzied they become. Okay, so back to the country of Draitho and the Gordron Valley. The Dorvani clan have lived in this region for several decades. The castle was originally built over 100 years ago, more so as a residential home rather than a defensible fortification. The matriarch of the Dorvani, Lady Isabel, discovered that the castle was owned by a minor lord, a solitary widower with no remaining family. She seduced this lord, gaining his love and trust, and when he died, he left his estate and title to her. From there, she and the other 4 members of the Dorvani clan began to slowly creep their influence into the region, learning the hushed secrets of the local court and establishing a network of enthralled mortals and spies. While they saw themselves as superior to the mortals, the Dorvani still had their uses for them. The mortals could be out during the day, running errands for the vampires, or even sharing the goings-on of the city if they were already someone of status. This went on for some time until something forever changed Draitho and its people. I won't get into the full detailed version of this, since I think it warrants its own video, but basically, 12 years ago, a powerful coven of witches staged a coup against the monarchy of Draitho, and, really, anyone with any power that could oppose them. The king and many lords and ladies were killed, including the Lord of Abingate, who was unfortunately in the capital of Draitho at the time. Several months later, the witches were defeated, and Draitho began to rebuild under a new monarchy, with a new religion as well. Any magic not approved by this new church, Basically, anything outside of the clerics, paladins, and druids was outlawed and potentially punishable by death. Two of the minor lords from the Gordron Valley, Lord Oscar Greywood and Lord Patrick Albright, were in consideration to become the new lord of this region, but ultimately, the new Queen of Dratho appointed Greywood to be its overseer. Lord Greywood and Lord Albright were around the same age and grew up together as friends. They even fought in the rebellion against the Witch Coven. Outwardly, Lord Albright was happy for his friend's promotion, but privately, he was jealous. He thought that he should have been chosen instead, so he became resentful of his friend. The Dorvani clan keyed in on this one-sided tension and began to sink their claws into the spiteful lord. They revealed their true selves as vampires to him and promised that he could one day become lord of the region in exchange for his loyalty. Lord Albright was pretty dubious about this potential partnership with vampires, but he desperately wanted the lordship, so he agreed. The Dorvani told him that they would need to wait for the right moment, but to be ready to obey their orders. And eventually, about 6 years later, that moment arrived. A wood elf vampire by the name of Sebastian wandered into the Gordron Valley, intent on carving out his own territory. Sebastian was of the feral strain, and was highly aggressive, and, at times, even sadistic. Unlike the Dorvani clan, who were cautious about feeding so as not to be discovered, Sebastian fed on whomever he wanted with little regard for the potential consequences. Initially, he was unaware of the other vampires, but that would soon change. Sebastian began to form his own clan, stalking the smaller villages and randomly picking off the villagers to create his vampire spawn. He then picked a couple of them that annoyed him the least and turned them into true vampires to be his lieutenants. This new feral clan began a rampage across the Gordron Valley, feeding on whomever they pleased, leaving behind nothing but shredded carcasses and bloodied piles of bones. Eventually, Sebastian grew bolder and made his way to Appengate, infiltrating the city at night with a few of his clanmates. Sometimes they would abduct a few people to share with the others back in their den, but other times the bloodthirst was on them too heavily, so they gorged themselves on some of the unlucky citizens of Appengate on the spot. This drew the attention of both the Dorvani clan and Lord Greywood. After the whole witch fiasco 6 years prior, and with Dratho's new magic bad policy, many of the more supernatural creatures fell under that category. An order of witch hunters was established to track down and sometimes eliminate anything that fell under that anti-magic umbrella. When the citizens of the Gordron Valley were being literally shredded to pieces, a witch hunter was called in to investigate, a man by the name of Talrin. After a bit of investigating, Hunter Talrin discovered that they did indeed have a vampire problem, though this seemed to be a strain that he was unfamiliar with. A small task force was formed consisting of Lord Greywood, Lord Albright, and a couple other local leaders to assist Talrin with his investigation and supply him with anything he needed. Though the mortal citizens of Appengate weren't the only ones looking into this, the Dorvani began an investigation of their own. The very notion of another clan of vampires coming into their territory and stirring up trouble was deeply infuriating to the Dorvani. They had a good thing going and weren't about to let some mongrels come in and disrupt that. Despite their anger, however, they also saw an opportunity in all this chaos and confusion. They were going to use these intruders to their advantage. Lady Isabel began to devise a plan to bait the feral vampires into the city so that her vampires could use the chaos as a diversion and cover to assassinate Lord Greywood, leaving Lord Albright as his clear successor, and the Dorvani clan as the true rulers of the region, since Albright would be secretly loyal to them. But while the Dorvani were plotting and scheming, Hunter Talrin was continuing his investigation. He inquired around the region about anyone going missing, or being brutally killed, or even just strange supernatural rumors within the last several years. He discovered a few leads relating to those things, but nothing that could point him to the cause or whereabouts of the vampires. That is, until he heard the rumors swirling around Castle Orm. Among the common folk, the witch hunters of Dratho are equally respected and feared due to the authority and power they hold. But those emotions aren't always shared by those on a higher rung of the social ladder. It's one thing to ask to search the home of a peasant for any contraband or witchcraft. it's another thing to ask the same of nobility. Tauren was free to inquire about the castle and its inhabitants, and even approach the castle in hopes of conversing with the owners, but he would need an official warrant to go inside and delve deeper. This would not be an easy ask, and Lord Greywood, and really any other regional lord, would be reluctant to sign off on such a thing. So for the time being, Tauren continued his investigation elsewhere, gathering any scraps of info about the castle that he could, but also focusing on the threat of feral vampires first and foremost. He began to suspect that there might actually be two different groups of vampires in the region, with the ferals being a recent development, and that Castle Orm had something to do with it, though he didn't have any concrete evidence yet. This caught the attention of the Dorvani, both from Lord Albright informing them about the issue, and also Tauren snooping around the castle. Albright tried to dissuade him from investigating the castle and nobility that lived there, claiming that they had more important things to do. But this only drove the witch hunter to investigate further, and to suspect that Lord Albright might also be involved in this somehow. Tauren was becoming a problem for the Dorvani clan, so they accelerated their plans before he could discover them and spread the word. Lady Isabel tasked one of the other true vampires, Alfred, with finding the feral den. Knowing that the ferals would sometimes infiltrate the city, Alfred waited for them to do exactly that before quietly following them back towards their den after they feasted upon some unfortunate citizens of Abingate. After learning the location of the den, he reported back to Castle Orm and shared what he learned. The following night, Alfred and two of his spawn waited by the den and followed Sebastian until they were a decent distance away from the rest of the ferals. The goal was to capture Sebastian and use him as the bait for their plan. The Dorvani assumed that these feral vampires were nothing more than rabid dogs, so it seemed as though Alfred and two of his spawn would be enough to defeat the small hunting party. Though they didn't know it, this would be a grave miscalculation. During the ambush, both the Dorvani and feral spawn were ripped apart, leaving only Alfred and Sebastian remaining. Unfortunately for him, Alfred underestimated his adversary, and for reasons which I'll get into later, Sebastian was much more powerful than any of the Dorvani had anticipated. He overpowered Alfred and dragged him back to his den. The feral vampires tortured and interrogated their prisoner, but he refused to give them any information about the Dorvani clan, so they killed him. Sebastian allowed his feral spawn to feast upon Alfred's flesh. They then dumped the body at the entrance of the city to serve as a warning to the Dorvani. Sebastian didn't know who or where they were, but he figured that word would reach them if he left the mangled body of one of their members at the city gates. Word did indeed reach the Dorvani, and they were furious. A few days later, the full force of the Dorvani clan laid in wait to ambush and capture Sebastian. They lost several spawn, but they managed to subdue the feral leader and whisk him away to Castle Orm. They imprisoned him in the castle and took several samples of his blood to smear a faint trail leading from the outer wall of Abingate to the dungeon further in the city. A few days after that, a servant of the keep in Abingate subtly approached Hunter Tauren and claimed to have some information about the recent vampire attacks. However, she was also scared and didn't want to draw too much attention to herself, so she wanted the witch hunter to meet her at a friend's farm just outside the city later that night. Tauren agreed to the meeting, but suspected that it might be some kind of trap, so before going out to the farm, he left his journal in his room and instructed one of the guards to send it to Lord Greywood or one of the witch hunter offices in one of the larger cities if he didn't return within 2 days. Within this journal, Tauren kept notes about all the pieces of evidence he had gathered from his investigation of the vampires. This included both his findings about the feral attacks and also his suspicions about a secondary clan of vampires and Castle Orm. He also made sure to write down his suspicions about Lord Albright, though he didn't have any explicit evidence to implicate him or the inhabitants of the castle. Regardless, he set out to meet with the servant later that night. Meanwhile, the rest of the feral vampires were growing anxious about the disappearance of their master, so a group of them decided to go to Abingate to search for him. They quickly picked up the false trail and followed it to the dungeon, but they found no sign of him as they slaughtered their way past the guards. The city's alarm bells began to ring out as the vampires were now sighted, and additional guards were assembling towards the threat. The streets swiftly devolved into chaos and bloodshed, with feral vampires attacking anyone they came across in a frenzied and confused rage. Shortly before the alarm bells were sounded, Tauren made his way to the farmhouse to meet with the servant. While he suspected that it might be some kind of trap, he wasn't prepared for what followed. The servant greeted him and welcomed him into the house. But unfortunately for the witch hunter, Daphne and Maurice of the Dorvani clan were lurking inside, waiting for him. The servant turned out to be one of the human servants loyal to the Dorvani at Castle Orm. This was, indeed, a trap. Hunter Tauren fought as hard as he could, but was no match for two full-blooded vampires. With the witch hunter problem dealt with, they made their way back to the city to continue their plan. During the ongoing chaos within Abengate, some of the Dorvani vampires quietly infiltrated the homes of the people involved in the vampire investigation, most notably Lord Greywood, and savagely killed them to make it look like the feral vampires were responsible. The Dorvani then went around the city, killing any of the feral spawn out of view of the citizens, leaving only a handful of the ferals for the guards to deal with. As their numbers dwindled, the feral spawn eventually realized that their master would not be found this night, so they retreated away from the city, back to their den. In the aftermath of the attack, the citizens discovered that their lord had been slain, so Lord Albright, as a well-respected nobleman and veteran, took it upon himself to rally a militia to hunt down the rest of the vampires. He told the citizens that Tauren had discovered the location of the den and shared it with him, but was unfortunately killed in the attack the previous night. Though, truthfully, the Dorvani clan told him where the den was. With a bloodlust of their own, this militia besieged the feral vampire den, attacking during the day when the vampires would be at their weakest and most vulnerable. They set fires and threw pots of holy water at them and staked them whenever they could. Both sides suffered casualties, but the ferals more so than the militia. In the chaos, a group of vampires escaped out of the cave. Some of them were able to find shelter to hide elsewhere, but others were not so lucky and burned to death from the sunlight. With both of Sebastian's true vampire lieutenants slain and most of the feral spawn defeated, Lord Albright and his militia declared victory over the vampire menace. They returned to Abengate to help with the recovery effort and move past the tragedy that had befallen them. They buried their dead, burned the corpses of vampires, and in recognition for his efforts, Patrick Albright was declared the new lord of the Gordron Valley. Lord Albright finally had the title and position that he so desperately coveted, and the Dorvani clan now had an immense amount of influence over the region as they ruled from the shadows. A few of the feral spawn were still loose in the valley somewhere, stalking at night and preying upon any unfortunate people they came across. But the Dorvani used this as a cover to more easily feed and carry out their vampiric tasks. If someone spotted a vampire or a victim of a vampire, they would just assume it's one of the feral stragglers. As for Sebastian, let's go back in time again to find out why he was so powerful. A very long time ago, a vampire by the name of Armand sought to cheat Vargalis out of his blood tithe. Armand wanted to keep all of the tithe to himself so he could grow stronger. After years of experimentation, he created an amulet that would allow him to keep all of the blood tithe when feeding on a mortal. Vargalis could sense that his tithe was being stolen, so he tasked his hunter, a vampire by the name of Cole, to hunt down Armand as punishment for his theft. According to vampire legend, Cole is one of the oldest known vampires and acts as a personal champion for Vargalis, doing tasks for the vampire god since he isn't really on the same plane of existence and can't usually interact with things in this realm. Cole tracked down Armand and put his axe through the thief's head. As further punishment and humiliation for this treachery, Vargalis had a tomb constructed where Armand's cleaved skull and tithe-stealing amulet were sealed away. This wasn't really a warning to other vampires, but rather a trophy for Vargalis's own amusement. Many years later, Sebastian overheard some treasure hunters talking about a tomb they discovered that would undoubtedly contain some kind of treasure within. Sebastian, being a kleptomaniac who derived a great amount of joy from stealing things, followed these treasure hunters to the tomb. He quickly disposed of them, and discovered both the skull and amulet of Armand. He swiped the shinies and equipped the amulet, becoming attuned to it. As a quick note, when Vargalis sealed it away in the tomb, he also cursed the amulet in a way that would obscure its magical effect if someone were to try to identify it with magic. Despite this, Sebastian donned the amulet out of curiosity because, he thought to himself, he was immortal, so what was the worst that could happen? Over time, he found himself growing stronger and stronger the more he fed on mortals. He assumed it must be from the amulet, though he wasn't aware of what was following him. Vargalis could again sense that another vampire was cheating their way out of the tithe, so he tasked his huntsman to track him down and put a stop to it. Vargalis isn't omniscient, so he doesn't know where all of his vampires are at any given time. Because of this, it would take a little while for Cole to pick up the thief's scent and find him. Going back to the modern day, 6 years after the feral vampires were mostly wiped out, Sebastian is now imprisoned in the dungeon at Castle Orm. The Dorvani clan have discovered the amulet, since he was wearing it. While Lady Isabel and the rest of the Dorvani vampires are pretty knowledgeable about the history of their kind, the amulet and Vargalis's trophy tombs are mostly unknown, even among the most informed vampiric scholars. Still though, they could tell that something was amiss with this amulet. In the years of his imprisonment, the Dorvani have tortured and interrogated Sebastian about the amulet. Where did he get it? What does it do? However, Sebastian has a surprising amount of resilience and refuses to give them any information. Maybe it's because he likes the idea of keeping secrets as a final form of revenge. Maybe he's just an asshole. Regardless, the Dorvani vampires aren't too concerned with finding out the truth in a timely manner, since they don't know the significance of the amulet, and they, quite literally, have all the time in the world. Lady Isabel also doesn't mind Sebastian withholding information because it gives her more time to torture him as revenge for Alfred. Cole the huntsman has been spotted in the Gordron Valley, though the Dorvani are the only people here that know of his legend. He's been scouring the region looking for Sebastian, but to no avail. He did discover Sebastian's stash where he hoarded some of his favorite things that he's stolen over the years, including the skull of Armand. He's probably close to discovering the Dorvani clan, and might even start putting together that they have something to do with Sebastian's disappearance. Only time will tell. As for Lord Albright, things have been mostly good for him after becoming lord of the region. He's admired and respected by his people, and he finally feels that he's where he deserves to be. Though this does come at a cost. The Dorvani expect to be able to feed on or even abduct people to turn into their cattle, so Lord Albright will sometimes have to divert resources away from the investigations of missing or killed people to keep the attention off of his vampiric masters. Some people are also losing their patience with the fact that, after 6 years, there are still feral vampires skulking around in the darkness. They want the vampire threat completely eradicated, but from their perspective, Lord Albright seems to be dragging his feet and waving off the issue like it's unimportant. The last thing I'll mention about Albright is that, in the aftermath of the attack on Abingate, a guard came to him with Talrin's journal. It was supposed to go to Lord Greywood, but now Lord Albright is in charge. Fortunately for the new lord, the guard didn't bother reading the journal, probably out of fear of witch hunters, so he doesn't know anything about the secondary vampire plot. Though he does know about the journal, so he might be a loose end that may need to be tied up one day. Lord Albright now keeps the journal tucked away in his office as a potential card to play down the road if he feels the winds changing again. The Dorvani vampires aren't aware of its existence, so this is the only tiny bit of leverage that the Lord of the Gordron Valley has over them. So, that's the story of how this region in the country of Dratho came to be in its current state. I might make some more content about this vampiric place in the future, like some landmarks, or characters, or smaller plots that could be useful for adventures. Until then, thanks for watching.